So, next up on our final talk for today's events is Mfikela Jean Samuel. Mfikela is an artist based in Bangor, and he is going to give us a talk on the Artistry of Maps. So we give a welcome to Mfikela.
Good afternoon, everybody. Yeah, I'll first of all excuse myself because I'm not an intellectual. We've heard from many articulate people who are grounded in what they are doing, and they are so versed with the subject. I'm just a small artist, and I know how to draw lines on paper. And also sometimes I do some coloring. Yeah, but I'm happy with that though. That notwithstanding, as we have understood here today, art can lend itself to many more things in society and in life. And that is why I am here. I originally come from a country called Cameroon, and this is in West Africa. I've been in this community for about 10 years now. I came to study, and I hope I'll still continue to study. My intention was to leave a bit after the first part of the studies, but something kept me back here. You will learn your people, and a lot of wonderful things. I understand that the community, like any other community, is not perfect, but there is a lot here to keep someone like me to be with you for much longer. And I can say thank you for your hospitality. I am an artist by profession, a painter, and thanks to that, the journey of my life, of which today's presence is part of, has been made possible. In my small community, in my small village, we are very creative. A child learns how to draw, how to dance, how to paint, how to sculpt, just like you learn how to talk, how to walk, and how to play. It's just a way of life. I thought every child in the world was like that. Even though we lacked the material things to do our work very well, the determination, the curiosity, the creativity, and the ingenuity was always there. The main source of my inspiration has been my culture. I use art as a way to tell my story to the rest of the world, and that has taken me to many places, to meet many people. And interestingly, especially today, people are keen to know what appears or what's happening beyond the boundaries of their own country and beyond what they know. Our world is much closer today, much united than ever before in human history, also thanks to technology. I have said this in many different places, but I still want to share it because in this library, there's a lot that I saw when I go around, a lot of different art from different people, which is that when I first came to this community, I realized that my way of art was different. Somebody remarked out of love that it was very colorful, and that this kind of art does not sell in Wales. He invited me to look into the works of other artists here, and the works were great. A typical example that this guy pointed to was a guy called Coffin Williams. He said that if I wanted to make a name here or to be known, I should try to paint like Mr. Coffin Williams, because that is what the Welsh people are used to. This advice came out of love, out of concern, but also out of ignorance. This good friend did not realize that I could not tell the Welsh story more than the Welsh. And thankfully, there were people here to tell your story, but I came to tell my own story, to make you to be connected to my own people, to know what appears in Africa, even when you don't go there. And thankfully, with time, a lot of people saw sense in that. And this same person that I'm talking about is my highest promoter today. And he's happy that I followed my ingenuity, creativity, and also my own inspiration. At one point, I was invited to do some work for this library, the colonization project. Yasmin, who was talking here before, I've been able to work with her. Dr. Marian, who just left here, I've also worked with her. And in this project, I was introduced to more about maps. Before that project, I had not known that maps were very artistic. I used to see just lines on paper, showing directions, showing landscapes, showing distances between places. I saw the how, but as Dr. Marian said, I did not understand the why. But during that project, I was able to know the why. And before that project, there was another project that I got involved in called responding to some of the works of a man called Thomas Pennant, who was an armchair traveler, but at least he did something. From this country a few centuries ago, he sat, and by proxy, he wrote about other countries, about other continents, and about Africa. I was so happy with his work, at least that someone at that time showed interest and understood that humanity was also existing beyond the common boundaries that he found himself within. I also responded to that work, and this library too collected part of that work. When I was going around today, I was happy to see that my paintings were in a few different places, and that made me to feel useful, if not proud. And it also made me to understand that I'm actually telling the African story from the African perspective, and that this notion of inclusion, diversity, which our country stands up for, is actually happening even here. So, my dear friends, I'll show you what I have learned after I understood what maps could do. Now I know that maps can also include cultural aspects, artistic aspects, and also the intentions, the imaginations, the visions of the people. And as I said, it stands to the project that I did here. For example, if you look at the opening of my PowerPoint, the colors are just so beautiful. It looks like an abstract painting, but that's a map. And the colors, they represent what they represent, but that is something. And also, the other two images, somebody has drawn portraits on maps. I don't know the reason, but at least they are representing some beauty. In that case, art has not only, the map is not only an instrument to show distances, but a canvas to express creativity within. All right. When I mentioned that my inspiration is my culture, and I intended to share with the world the works of life of my people, the culture of my people, or what happens there. These are some of my artworks, and you rightly see that they are different from what you see around or from what the other artists do around. And they are also filled with color. This one in particular is my most famous work. I did this during COVID-19, the period of COVID-19, because I was locked in the house alone. I was living alone at that time, and I had to make sure that my time was useful, otherwise I would have been depressed. So for a few years, I was just painting. And this is one of the works that happened in that time. It's quite big and quite large. And this work to me is like an encyclopedia, telling the story of my culture from when I was young up till now. All the items you see there, they have something to say. If somebody from my village comes here, they'll immediately tell you about, for example, the governing societies, the sacred societies, the constitution, which is unwritten, but there is some kind of law and order. In my village, you don't go to the book to see the law. You have to sit with your grandfather or your grandmother, sometimes in the evening, and they'll tell you that this is how things are supposed to be. And when you see, for example, the rainbow in that direction, expect this or expect that. They are so close to nature, and sometimes they interpret what, sometimes I don't know how they manage to understand those things. So this is still the kind of atmosphere that prevails there now up to a certain level, but modernization has also included many other things, but this is still there. And now, more than ever before, people are consciously maintaining this culture. Looking at the other paintings, some of the signs that you see, there's a language in West Africa, some people don't actually know, it's called Adinkra. In Ghana in particular, those symbols that you see, they mean certain things. I also draw inspiration from Egypt. Like you can see the eyes. You can see some of the signs in the Pharaoh's caves, and so on and so forth. So when I meant that my inspiration was my culture, I was talking about things like this. But I've stayed for some time here that this community has also influenced me. And as I said, when I was given a commission by this library to do something relating to maps, I now started having that interest to know what happens or what is underneath maps. What is the underlying score? What is beyond those lines on paper? All right. In my research, I realized that about 600 years before Christ, the Babylonians, they had their first map. This is one of the first known maps in the world. And this was done on clay, maybe by a sculptor. It looks like a work of art, but this is actually a map. When I read the documents, it showed that around the map there is a certain river called River Euphrates or something, and mountains and trees and so on, and some inscriptions that cannot really be understood by the modern man. But at least, this was where, according to recorded history, it all began. All right. Then the other one, I also, they've talked about it here, something called the mapiau'n. About the other three speakers talked about it. Yeah, I also understood that that is how another map was around, in that kind of material. And to me, that is just a work of art. It's not just an area or a platform. It's a work of art. All right. Going more to around the Renaissance, there was a guy called Gerard Marquestos in 1597. And he actually drew this particular map. And you can see the decorations all around. They have nothing to do with the geography, nothing to do with the distance. It's just a beautiful work. So the intention was not just to show the direction, or not to show an area or distances between places, but actually to make it look beautiful. And that is the work of art. You make things look beautiful, not just to be useful. You make them look beautiful. You make them look nice, look good. You add some color and veneer it with something that attracts people. Colors have power, and designs too have power. And the other one too is the same. It's from the Dutch. You can see that one combines the map as we know them, but also some religion aspects, theology, and the ownership of land. All of these are maybe their own sense around the whole thing, but the sense has nothing to do with the distances within the map. It's just a way to adorn the document or the picture. This one is from our country, or from England. When artists decide, instead of just drawing lines, but they actually draw physical objects, trees, bicycles, and this is a part of London, and the other one as well, for people who know. So these artists go beyond just lines, but they actually put the physical aspects on their work. And that is art. Then we looked at this one before, which I love very much. In this case, the artwork itself is done on the map. Somebody takes the map, tries to pretend that there are no lines, and draws a portrait on it. And they become so popular. I did not expect that this kind of creativity existed. In my research, I really loved it, and I saw that art could lend itself to any other thing in the world. And then, these ones now were done by me. After learning the things I learned, I did this. This second one is somewhere in this slide here. It was my response to the map that I was given from here. But I tried the response to align them with who I was as a person, with what I knew about Africa and about the world as well. If you can look carefully, you see the African map somewhere. And inside the African map, there is a figurine. That figurine inside the African map is very, very particular. is very, very typical of something. It tells a story. That is a figurine that a guy called Métisé saw in France with Pablo Picasso. That led to the development of an important branch in art called modern art. When Pablo Picasso saw that figurine, he now realized that it was important for him to start deviating from painting nature as it was, because at that time there was photography, which was now becoming more popular than what they could do, than what the human hand could do. And they were looking for a way to deviate art, to do something creative. When they saw that figurine, it led to Cubism and the rest of the paintings that we know. When some people see the works of Pablo Picasso, it's easy for you to know that this work has some connection with African art, with African sculptures or things like that. For a long time, the Africans have been doing modern art. They had understood that the essence for art is not just to represent nature with exactness, but to represent it as you want it to be. That's the power that an artist has. An artist is a creator. You see things the way they are, but you represent them as you want them to be, because you understand too that as a human being, you have the creative impulse of the universe, and you can decide to edit reality. So that worked at the middle, inspired what we call modern art today. You can see the face of a lion. That's the totem of my own country. And this is a guy called, I've forgotten. I just remember the name, but I've forgotten. But he's one of the colonial masters who came to Africa and did a lot of mapping as well. And in that, I also realized that when you look at a map, when you see railways, coastlines or things like that, it is not like there were no other railways. Or the reason that there are railways is because they are taking someone towards somewhere. And most of the colonial maps were taking people to where the resources were, and also taking people to where they could transport the resources to other places, to ports in the world. So there was always a reason why certain things were in the maps. And most of them were in favor of the colonial masters, because their main intention was to take as much as possible from the colonies at the shortest possible time. And sometimes in order to take, you must be able to create a ground that will favor the taking. That's why some of them were attempted to develop the places that they went to work in. Now, talking about all of these maps, this one was also done by me for another project. You can see an African map here, but inside you see a few animals. This was supposed to be a giraffe, the other one a lion, the other one, I don't even know. And that one is a yeah, that's something with art. Sometimes you do things but you don't know what you have done. Then somebody comes and tells you what you did. I like it when people see in my art things that I did not intend, because it helps me to know that I've also sparked creativity in their own minds. I'm not around the world to tell people about my creativity, but to make them to discover their own hidden creativity, what is within them. And the best way is to let them or even see the way. Show them, just point the way, let them look at it and interpret in their own way. So I don't really know that animal, but you can choose what it is. But at the end of the day, it tells us something about Africa. So art can actually lend itself to too much. When I was thinking about these boundaries, these lines that somebody draws, and then they divide countries, then they divide the world, and then people sometimes fight to defend them. I remember a story I read about a guy called Yuri Gagarin. On the 12th of April 1961, this guy went to space. He was a Russian, the first person to go out of this planet, Earth. And when he looked at the world from that space, he did not see lines. He did not see boundaries. He saw a blue world, a place he called home. And he said that was our home. That's our home. So when he came back, he changed his conception and perception of those lines. And he knew that this illusion of differences that we create between ourselves because of lines done by a man is not very, very necessary. We are supposed to be one people, irrespective of the other differences that we have. And maybe the boundaries should be there, but they should be there to protect us, to protect our unity, not to actually divide us. We are living in very, very difficult times today. I followed carefully the presentation of Yasmin and it provokes a lot of things in me. And I think that we need people like that to stand up and be able to tell things the way they are. And this world needs us more than ever before. Sometimes we forget that human progress does not rule on the wheels of inevitability. We have taken it for granted so much that we can live in peace, we can live in unity, and that justice prevails. Those things were bought for us, fought for by people. Some of them lost their limbs, others their lives, for that to happen. And if we are not conscious and careful, and intentionally or deliberately make sure that those things stay, our children will not see it. What affects one race today will affect the other race tomorrow. An injustice to anybody in the world is a threat to justice to anyone else in the world. When we come to events like this, it is important to go back with our humanity enforced. To remember that, even as one person, you can change the world. You can do wonderful things for humanity. You don't need to change the world by, for example, going to Ukraine today to fight, or to Syria to fight. You can change the world by smiling to a stranger, by rebuking a bully, by raising a downtrodden, by listening to someone in trouble, by encouraging someone, by making people to feel at home. I told you that my stay in this country extended because people made me to feel at home. It was because of the people. And then the landscape which I love to draw. And I was like, home is where you are loved. That is something. And I'm telling people about that. Even though we still have more to do for each other and to go forward, we should remember that it is not enough just to wish well for humanity. The world is destroyed, not because of the violence of the bad people, but because of the silence of the good people who sit and do nothing. Dr. Martin Luther King once said that at the end we shall remember not the words of our enemies, but the silence of our friends. There comes a time in life when indifference is betrayal. We're living in very, very dangerous moments today. I'm not sounding the alarm bell too soon. If we are not very careful, what our grandfathers, great-grandfathers have worked for in terms of unity in the world will be crumbled very, very soon. But you have a role to play. I know that we all mean well for this world, but it is not enough again to mean well. You should act well. You should do your best to stop evil from happening. You should rebuke the bullies. You should be willing to talk truth to power. That is how people who went before us stood and fought for things to be the way they are today. After the Second World War, a lot of good things have happened in the world. Freedoms have been increasing, independence between nations. And then we took it for granted that things would only be getting better. No, it is not inevitable. If we don't step in, they will not become better. Human progress does not rule on the wheels of inevitability. Every good thing happening in this generation today is always one generation away from extinction. It is us human beings that custard goodness and make it to maintain itself. And if we love our children, which we do, we should not let history repeat itself. It took Adolf Hitler just a few months to change a constitutional republic into a dictatorship. And a lot of people were indifferent, and they only got in when they had to go in, and he had caused a lot of damage in the world. Let us be sensitive to injustice, even if it is not affecting us directly. What affects me directly must affect you indirectly. For some strange reason, I can never be what I ought to be until you are what you ought to be. So while we are celebrating our maps, let us not celebrate them as a means to divide ourselves between people. Let's understand that we need each other. A lot of people like me who live in this community, we work hard to succeed, and sometimes we give more than what we receive. In a special way, I know what it meant to be Welsh, and I share this with the world. So sometimes it is important to forget about my color, but to look at my contribution, what I'm doing, and to help me even do it better. Because when you help me do it better, it is for the good of humanity. Value is value. It does not matter the color from which the value comes out from. Good is good. It doesn't matter where it emanates from. And with your collaboration, and with my support, we'll make this country and the world a better place. May we go back home today as changed people, as people who are now determined to go beyond just hoping and expecting, wanting and desiring goodness to flourish in the world, but as people who are willing to begin from their houses to talk to their children in a way that those children know that the responsibility of making the world a better place too lies in their own hands. If we don't do something, if we just stay within the realms of waiting and hoping, this world is going to be destroyed, because sometimes in life, the bad people are more organized than the good people. And who is going to win is the organized person. Thank you very much for listening. Yeah.
Thank you, Mfikela, for a very, very inspiring and motivational speech. We have a few minutes before we close off, so we open the floor to any questions? Anyone got any questions or comments, thoughts?
My grandfather was Methodist minister and president of the conference, and he opened his second conference in the Central Hall in London by saying, "Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, don't be worried, but we all fart." And it works, and that was in the 1930s, and people in the Methodist movement still remember that, because it's true, we do all fart. And thank you for a wonderful talk. It was superb, inspirational. Martin Luther King will be very proud of you.
Any further? Oh, telephone, Mary?
Thank you. I think that was, as ever, absolutely fantastic. It is just wonderful seeing how you bring your work into from Africa to Wales. Could you explain a little bit about your own experiences as a child and how you formed your life in art in your village in Africa, please, in Cameroon?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Doctor. That's a very good question, because it's quite a bit different from how children here form their lives in art. Even though, as I said, in my culture, children are generally very creative, but we did not have the material growing up. I had the ambition to become a great painter, not for the sake of it, because I wanted to travel the world. I had this vision that one day I'll be in some places that my family did not even buy the vision at that time. They thought that I was hallucinating, because they couldn't pay for what was required for this kind of journey to take place. But it was somehow ingrained in me by forces that I could not control. Every time an aeroplane passed through the skies of my country, I would be gazing for some time, and I'll be lost in wonderment. I'll be asking myself, where is that iron bird going to? That's how I thought. I thought of it as an iron bird. I'll be like, maybe there is somewhere beyond the next valley, the next ocean, and then the one day I just said I'll go there. And one day my brother came and nudged me, an elderly guy, and told me that your dreams are too big for this family, please reduce them, otherwise you become disappointed. He said it out of love. But I then decided that art would be my ticket. I knew that if I developed my artworks very well, someone would see it. Someone would love it, and that person will help me to travel in one way or the other. But there was no material. I then had to improvise a means together with some friends. We burned our own wood and used charcoal from the wood as our pencils. We used slates and cardboards and plywoods as our sketching boards. And we worked with that for a few years. Then for the paint, we discovered a certain mountain that had some chalky rocks with different pigments. We'll go there and mine those rocks and use egg white as a binder. And that became our paint. For our brushes, we'll create our brushes. We discovered a place where cows were being slaughtered, or cattle, for beef. So when we go there, we got the tails of the cow, removed the hair, and made our own brushes. For our canvas, we used raffia to weave the canvas with. And we painted with that for about 10 years. I was more consistent because I had a mission. Mine was not just to express what I thought was inside of me. I wanted to use that as a way to travel the world. And then one day, after about 10 years, somebody came and saw what I had painted and bought my first painting, the equivalent of about, it was 20 pounds, about 16, sorry, it was $20, which is the equivalent of about 16 to 18 pounds in this country. Then again, the magic moment came. Some volunteers came from the United States of America as Peace Corps. And one of them was told that in that village there was an artist, and the fingers pointed towards me. So when he came and entered my studio in quotes, nothing compared to what you have here, he said that I didn't know that at the far corners of the earth, I'll see this kind of great work. And then he said, but my ears were open to hear the but. Then he said the obvious. He said, your material is not good. I said, yes, material is not good. I wish I had the better one. The problem is that. Then we struck a deal that very evening. And the deal was that he'll provide professional medium for me, and I'll pay him back with finished works of art. This was not even far away. This was just in 2010. And thankfully, his parents were to come to my country 2 weeks after. And then he telephoned them to bring art material. And it looked to me as if the only thing they brought was my material. There was so much. When the material came, I just locked the doors of the world. Went inside. All the inspiration I've gathered overflowed on that canvas. And before the parents went back 1 month after, they did not believe what they went back with. Some as payment for what they have done, and others to sell for me. By 2011, I had my first international art exhibition. International still in my country, but these white people from America were able to spread. They became like my tentacles. They became like my contacts to the world. They told their friends around other countries, who were around other countries around Cameroon, and invited them to that small village. And they came for that exhibition. For 3 days straight, the economy of that small village boomed. All the beer was finished. And it was a very, very extraordinary moment in my life. And by 2013, I was able now to go to first the Netherlands, then France, Switzerland, and then Germany, and then South Sudan. Went back to Cameroon, 2014. I went through these countries again, and then to the United Kingdom. And the rest is history. That's the journey. So at the end of the day, my desire to travel the world has begun. Not ended, has begun. And I choose the right thing. I use my gift. I develop my gift, and then nudge the attention of the world towards it. There's one thing I did not say. Recently, I have decided to be a talent promoter as well. I believe that every child has a gift. Even every adult has a gift. And I intend to invite people to look deep inside their existence and see what they brought to the world. Sometimes we spend our time learning to become someone else, and the original version of ourselves does not find a chance to express itself to the world. I will invite you people to try to be artists in one way or the other. If you cannot sing, at least draw, paint, do some embroidery, do some weaving, do some dancing. Just do something, not for the money, not for the attention, just because that helps you to express your soul. It releases you. There is something about you that you have not yet seen. Because what is good for the children is also good for the adults. Adults should be children, but they think that to be a child is not maturity. But that is where our happiness resides, in keeping our youthful enthusiasm. And you can keep it by maintaining your creativity. That can actually give you a new perspective in life. So if you live here today being the same person, it is by choice. You are invited to become an artist. You may discover a better version of yourself that you have not looked into. I hope I answered your question. All right.
Okay, I think we'll have to leave it there because time's pressed on, but thank you again, Mfikela, for a fantastic talk. And yeah, thank you very much.
Welcome.
Another round of applause. So, to finish off with, we're going to invite Gareth Edwards, who is the Head Archivist for the Royal Commission and HMS Organonis Wales, who's going to give a quick summing up about today's event. So, I'll hand over to Gareth.
Thank you very much. As John said, I'm the Head of Knowledge and Understanding at the Royal Commission, who are involved in this conference today. How do I sum that up? How do I sum the day up? But before I do, there's a few things I have to say. First of all, is just to thank the staff from the National Library of Wales and the Royal Commission for the hard work in organising and setting up this fantastic day. And also to the British Cartographic Society and the Society of Contemporary Arts in Wales as well for supporting this happening. Thank you very much as well to all the speakers who've been fantastic, I'm sure you all agree. And indeed, thank you to you, the audience, both here and watching online as well. So, summing up, I've got lots of notes. How do I do this? I mean, I did this last year, and the subject was the cartographers, the people who create the maps last year. And in summing up, you know, I praised them for their sort of almost heroic, I say dedication, their obsession with accuracy, measurement, reflecting the world, capturing the world as it actually is. The physical world, reality. But as an aside, I said also that cartography and maps are also an imaginative venture. You know, it's an act of imagination to take a set of lines and colours and symbols and try to create a world on a blank sheet of paper or a screen in 3 dimensions. And likewise, people who use maps are you know, making an imaginative leap when they use them. They're looking at flat lines, colours, symbols, but they're imagining a landscape, a townscape. They're going on journeys in their mind, even if you never visit or the places depicted or use the map to navigate those places. If you look at them and imagine yourself, as I did as a child, looking at ordnance survey maps, walking through the valleys and the hills, it's an act of imagination. And that conjuring of 3 dimensions of space on a flat paper, I think, is an artistic endeavour. So I think art is implicit in maps, but after what we've seen today, I think there's so much more that you can do artistically with maps. You know, the kind of artistic possibilities and imaginative possibilities of maps are great, as we've seen. So if we think about what UN does with maps, you know, by bringing different maps together, by distorting distances, you're not looking at the physical distance maybe, or the physical height of something. You're looking at the meaning between spaces and people, and you can use maps to bring those together. You might ignore physical distance, but you're mapping ideas or feelings, and histories. And I think, you know, what UN does with maps really, really sort of digs deep into that. Also, that idea of maps as shapes in their own right, abstracted from the actual land mass. And I think that taps into what we do as human beings when we see patterns, when we see shapes. We interpret them as things. So I was very interested in the idea of Wales depicted as a woman, and that brings me on to what Eseth was talking about. You know, that seems to be historically a real recurring thing, that people interpret that shape. And of course, it's a fraught idea as well, as Eseth you know, illustrated. I mean, it's more fraught than Italy being a boot, put it like that. Although if you're Sicilian, perhaps it isn't. But that idea that, you know, the shapes that depict our physical reality, human beings can see different symbols in them. I think, you know, that is an artistic leap. There's something else that Eseth said as well, you know, in relation to the Becker sort of movement, that art is implicit in our lives and in the landscape. And I think that's true, you know, and maps capture that. You can't separate them from sort of deeper meanings than just the distance between things. And, you know, what Jasmine said, she said a brilliant thing, which I've got a note here of, which I'll try and find. That's right, that art helps you to navigate identity, history, your place in the world. You know, so we're talking about maps as art. Perhaps we should be thinking about art as a map as well. You know, a map of ourselves, a map of what we feel and what we think. And I think that those two things come together very, very neatly. I was deeply impressed by the video piece he did, and that seemed to me to map across the globe that link between, which we'll talk about later, that link between, Penrhyn and the quarries, the plantations, the sugar, that beautiful image of the sugar in the darkness of the castle, I thought was a brilliant image, and that was like a map across the globe, really, of two linked things. But also the beauty of that image, the sugar seemed to almost fluoresce in the dark. Behind that beauty is the ugliness of the story of what created that sugar. And I think that's a brilliant artistic kind of conception, but it kind of maps the movement of people, money, history across the globe. So it is art as a map, I think. And talking of the ugly story behind the sugar, Marian's talk was sort of jaw-dropping, really, in the way it. I mean, this is a story we know, the exploitation of enslaved people for greed. There's no other word for it. But when you look at the kind of maps behind it, the raw figures of death, that encapsulates, I think it very starkly illustrates the kind of human greed. And what I found is that the maps that were depicted in that talk are kind of shorn of the artistic bits that make them human, that you can understand, because they're just obsessed with how much money you can suck out of the land and out of the enslaved people that you're using. And that aerial photograph actually was a stark illustration of that vampiric sort of use of people and land, wasn't it? And so those maps are not kind of, they don't inspire imagination. Those kind of maps just inspire a kind of picture of greed. And it's interesting that what you can use to interpret them is art. What gives them, so you can understand what a hill is or what a valley is, you need art and not the map itself. So I thought that was, again, showing you that uneasy relationship maybe between maps used for one thing and art used for another. And that brings me on to Mfikela's talk, which, again, I think illustrated the way that art in its own right can be a map. The large picture done during lockdown that illustrated Mfikela's, the important things in his culture and his upbringing and his life that all relate to each other in that large canvas. I think that's almost a map of himself in a way. And it shows how pictures can be maps. They might not show distances, but they can show relationships between people and ideas. And I think that's something that we should keep in mind. I mean, when at the beginning of his talk, when he said, I'm just someone who makes lines and puts colour on paper, that kind of brings us full circle, because that's what cartographers do, maybe for a different reason. And I love that idea that when you look at those kind of maps, you can abstract the beauty from them without thinking about what they're of, the how and the why, as you put it. So you can have a beautiful object made of colour and lines that don't necessarily relate to the distance or the height of objects. And again, it shows the kind of flexibility of maps as objects, really. And that link between mapping sort of cultures and ideas and boundaries. And I thought Mfikela's impassioned sort of call to us to break down those barriers, I think, is an important thing to remember when we're looking at maps as well. So, I mean, I could go on. I won't, because it's Friday evening. I'm sure you want to go out and enjoy the sunshine. But suffice it to say, I think today has been a really deep dive into the possibilities, the imaginative and artistic possibilities of maps, and it's certainly given me a lot to think about. So thank you to everyone who's contributed. I'm under strict instructions as well to say, before you leave, please can you fill in the questionnaire. Okay, but enjoy your Friday evening, so thank you very much.